All right, we're here with Robert Warren with Gigsy at Exponential Growth podcast. Robert, welcome to the show, and wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about your background and just to start off, tell us what your business does.
So I am the founder and CEO of a company called Gigsy. We are a solution for photographers, and the trajectory of what brought me here is kind of an odd story. So I live currently in New Orleans, Louisiana, but I'm from the north side of Chicago. And essentially, after I graduated college, was down teaching ninth grade English through a program called Teach for America, and then was working in nonprofit and was still interested in how do you create programming that creates some sort of social change or social benefit. Knew that teaching wasn't really the thing that I was passionate about as a career while I love education, and found that nonprofit, while I loved it, was also not what I wanted to do long term. So found myself now as an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, running a growing company in New Orleans.
Okay, now where did you get that kind of social change, benefit, nonprofit? Is that just, did you grow up around one, or what kind of started you out in that arena?
I really didn't, in all honesty. I wound up in New Orleans and didn't have, like every college student comes out with great dreams of changing the world, but not really understanding what are the factors at play. I was initially just interested in first, what does it look like? I think a lot of us really don't know what a struggling school system looks like, or what ill effects of what social ills look like, right? So the first sort of thing was just being confronted with that. Having come from a background, a family where I never had to really grow up wanting for anything, it was really a culture shock to be in a scenario where all of a sudden I'm tasked with being an educator, a teacher, but having to really educate myself on what is it like to live, to grow up in poverty, to grow up in the Deep South. And so I wouldn't say that I really sort of grew up really steeped in nonprofit per se, but it was always just an interest of finding out the way things work, and sort of what are the causes and effects in a social environment.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the business. How does your business make money? What's your market strategy there?
Awesome. Well, we're kind of in a funny spot, actually, because we are a bootstrapped startup and have undergone about 2 pivots at this point. So initially, the idea was we would get a group of essentially professional photographers that we would vet, and we would, through our platform at gigsy.co, become the hub where if somebody needed a photographer for an event, they would come to that platform. We would have the sort of onboarding questionnaire. They would book us through that platform, and then we would be able to rapidly source all of this work. And then there would be either a brokerage model or a flat rate model that we would pay out our photographers, and we would do all the processing in-house. What we found, though, is that doesn't really scale. So because the labor costs are fixed, as you get larger and larger, you have to keep bringing on new photographers. And part of our social mission is that because it's our vision that everyone has excellent photography, we're also training youth photographers out of some of the local high schools and pairing them up with our pro shooters as essentially secondary shooters, assistant shooters. So they get a paid internship. They get the opportunity to actually spend time around a professional photographer on professional shoots. And our initial assumption was that it would be marketable, but the case was it just doesn't scale. There's a fixed cost of labor. You can only channel so much work through it. So we've actually pivoted since then and gone more towards serving large destination management companies and large conferences where we can utilize the same pairing of a professional to a student photographer, but we can do it in a conference setting where we have 6 photographers total instead of 2. And we're shooting much bigger events that are requiring much more sort of heavy-duty programming.
And what's your pricing structure?
We price the initial event photography per hour, and the way that breaks down is that we keep it pretty close to market. So we give a discount for nonprofits, which sits at $95 an hour. For corporations, for-profits, we started at $120 an hour, with decreasing rates as the actual volume of hours booked go up. So we're trying to incentivize repeat customers, essentially. And then within that, we're paying out a fixed cost to a photographer, a fixed cost to an editor, and then the overhead that we carry with any of the digital back and forth.
How long has Gigsy been in business?
So Gigsy's been in existence for just about a year.
And you're the only founder, or you have any co-founders? Or
the only founder, but in our sort of current iteration, I'm actively looking for folks to partner with us, either in the biz dev level or somebody to operate more as a CTO.
So you're looking more to stay in what part of the company?
Want to stay in an executive position, obviously, as the CEO of the company, and make sure that I'm growing us into the market that best serves our creative community.
Good. Well, so tell me a little bit more about that market of the creative community. What market are you serving? What's the opportunity there? And what do y'all bring to the table in that market?
Excellent. So here's what it looks like. If you're a freelance photographer, so I have 10 years behind the lens, commercial photography and videography, your income essentially looks like a sine graph, the sort of wavy S curve, right? You get a big gig, you deliver that big gig, and then you're back in the grind, you're hustling. And because you're a freelancer, you're consistently going and trying to get new commissions. And so the same amount of work that you have to go into as somebody booking a $200 event, you essentially have to do when you're booking a $5,000 event. So our gambit, our assumption was that if we can source a lot of that mid-range traffic through per hour bookings in the $200 to $800, $900 range, but take off that burden to a photographer of having to do all the invoicing, all the negotiation, all the price discovery, we would be providing a service to the client who would have essentially standardized pricing with an assurance of quality. And the photographer would be willing to make less for the actual assurance of paying gigs. And thus far, our photographers have actually really, really enjoyed it, because all they have to do on any given day that we have a gig booked for one of our pros is furnish them with our onboarding questionnaire. They have contact information for the client. The client loves it because they get a little blurb about who the professional photographer is and just what they've shot. They get to see example images, and everybody walks out the door with good photos. Our photographers get paid right out the gate. So it's a win-win on both ends. And what we're really fixing is the opacity in the market, just the discovery of prices and quality.
And so if you had to describe your business model, I guess, for what you do, is there anyone out there that has a similar model, or what model have y'all chosen as a business?
So there are a few similarities, and on the front, a few similarities in other programs. Like you look at a Craigslist per se, right? Anybody can go on Craigslist and seek out a great photographer. Anybody can go on Elance, seek out a great photographer. We opted to not go for a marketplace model. The issue for that is that, it works if I'm hiring a designer who is 1,000 miles away, and I really like the guy or the lady. I can go back and forth and just go to my designer in the Netherlands. It's a little bit harder to maintain a marketplace when you're working in photography, which is necessarily person to person. And what we really wanted to avoid was launching a marketplace, having a whole bunch of people come in, be super excited, utilize our services, find great photographers, and never get more than one gig booked through our platform. Because the obvious thing to do would be just to go directly back to that customer or to that client that you were looking for. So we're going now more towards an actual production house model, where it's more of an agency, where we have folks that are working with us as contractors, and that way we can keep our quality very, very high and just have a vetted group of folks that we utilize at any given point in time.
Now, you were over here at Launchpad, right?
I'm actually upstairs. I'm in 4.0 schools. So I'm one of the tiny fellows through 4.0 schools Tiny Fellowship.
Okay.
So I have space just up there on the second floor.
What is Tiny Fellows? Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I love the Tiny Fellowship. It's great. So 4.0 schools, their whole mission is that they are essentially designing the future of school. And they don't know what that looks like. But what their gambit is, or what they're trying to do, is pump capital and resources into smaller, even pre-seed stage startups that may not have access. They may not have the traction to go and get 100K from somebody, but they have an idea that just needs to be rapidly vetted. And because we are not just interested in serving the adult photographers in the city, but we're also interested in growing youth photographers and providing access to them, to the resources and to the actual gigs, they selected us as one of their Tiny Fellows, which means that we get access to a purse, so a chunk of money, as well as access to training and access to, my actually favorite piece about it is that we get access to all these mentors. So essentially office hours for 20, 25 experts in education and beyond that they've vetted and keep on a platform for us.
And how many fellows do they have up there currently?
I think it's 26 right now.
26.
Yeah.
Why don't you describe for us a little bit the startup culture here in New Orleans, or where else have you experienced, and how important is that to be a part of that culture?
It's here, which might be a funny thing to say, but
here, meaning in Chicago, or
no, it's in New Orleans. I mean, it exists, and I think that's the first shock, is that you think about entrepreneurial hubs and you think about Silicon Valley, you think about even New York now has a bit of an ascent entrepreneurial culture. It doesn't really have its own sort of ethos yet. But in New Orleans, you come to New Orleans and you wouldn't necessarily expect there to be folks that are starting tech startups. You wouldn't expect a bioinnovation center. You wouldn't expect social innovation hubs, folks like the Idea Village. And yet, in the past 5 years, there's been this huge uptick. And it's absolutely fascinating. I love it. Because what I'm finding is that a young entrepreneur, I have immediate access to a number of really, really powerful resources. Where initially I was a little bit nervous. Do you really want to start a company in New Orleans? Are you going to be a big fish in a small pond? Is there going to be anybody there with any sort of leverage to assist you? What I've actually found is that culture is really taken off really quickly. And it still has a lot of the sort of compatriotism because there are just so few people in it. So it's easy to meet somebody like Dalton who's running a main spree, or to meet somebody like Michael who's running a scene hound, and to not feel like you guys are going toe-to-toe with each other, but to want to sit down and grab a beer and talk about the problems that we're having and actually try to keep the innovation going amongst us.
How important is it for young entrepreneurs, if you were just kind of speaking to them a little, how important is it to collaborate among people, not see them as your competitors, but really to just kind of feed off of one another?
Holy smokes. I think it's everything, honestly. I think that the sort of lone genius entrepreneur is totally overrated. And if you really want any credibility in a business sense, what you have to know how to do is just give. Because the reality is that we're all like, none of us we might have $1 million ideas, but we don't have $1 million bank accounts. And so much of what we have to do has to come from each other's experiences and our skill sets. And if you're not able to really just put yourself out there and be passionate about what you're doing, but be willing to help others, you're going to struggle. I think you're going to struggle in any entrepreneurial environment. So that's honest to God, one of the things that I'm most appreciative of, that there is that culture and there is that desire amongst us to really share what we're working on.
Yeah, to the audience, that's really powerful what Robert just said, how important that is to share and be open, to just give, and how that always comes back tenfold. Especially when you're young, you need so many resources in every direction, and you're not going to get all that yourself. You need a lot of help, so that's critical. All right, well, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Gabriel, where he'll talk about management and mentorship, and then finish off the show. It's good talking to you, Robert.
I appreciate it.
Well, Ro, thank you for joining us today. So let's go ahead and jump into the mentorship part of it, and you briefly talk about the importance of the ecosystem and being a part of this community is, but do you have any influence at an early age or somebody that inspire you to look up into entrepreneurship and that you build that relationship through a mentorship type of model?
I mean, if I couldn't go back super far, but honest to God, when I got to New Orleans and I was working in a school on the West Bank, my original mentor teacher, Marcus Henderson, was to me somebody who typified everything that I really wanted to be as a leader. He was incredibly respectful. He was incredibly hardworking. He was powerful, but he was humble about what he did. And to somebody, because you have to really think about, I'm a kid from the north side of Chicago who just finished an undergrad out of Indianapolis. I didn't know anything about the Deep South. And here I was showing up in a school that was entirely different from anything that I had ever experienced as a kid. And what Mr. Henderson did as a leader, as a mentor to me, was that he was constantly reiterating value. He was constantly reiterating principle about staying focused on whatever the goal was that you were working on. And honestly, I wouldn't be in New Orleans if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for me being in the presence of somebody with that kind of character. So I really do chalk him up to being the largest influence that I've had on me in the city of New Orleans. Because heck, I mean, I wouldn't have ever chosen to even stay if it hadn't been for his encouragement and his example, which is really what was impressive to me.
You guys still in contact? You guys talk every now and then, or?
We do. We stay in touch occasionally. And he's, where neither one of us are, I mean, obviously I'm not teaching anymore. He is currently teaching at a different school. So we do keep in touch periodically and we'll meet up. And he's the patent researcher. So anytime we wind up getting in touch, inevitably we'll wind up meeting at a Barnes & Noble where he's working on some article or something, and we're book sharing or we're resource sharing. So it's easy to sort of jump back into the old ways, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's good just to showcase that it doesn't have to necessarily be somebody that is just a successful entrepreneur or a war veteran type of guy that just went through everything in entrepreneurship, but it can be somebody that, like in your case, this person definitely had an impact in you. But that's what we encourage entrepreneurs. I'm 26 years old, so I came about 5 years ago here to the States, and first thing I did is I Googled up entrepreneurs in Baton Rouge. And then 2-3 weeks after that, I met my best friend today, Sean Simon. He ran the largest Baton Rouge entrepreneurship organization. So yeah, looking back, I do not have anybody else other than now Craig, that his nonprofit is dedicated to help young entrepreneurs. Man, I want to just step back and just touch a little bit more into the creative field. So you have a really interesting background from teaching now into the creative world and then the startup. Those are three different, completely opposite, I want to say, type of thing. Especially, I want to say this so I can give you some context. I started doing websites when I was 16 years old, so I thought I was a creative guy. Right? And then that whole culture of being creative, you kind of like start learning about fonts and typography and then photography and then websites and then design. You got all that path and that culture. But then suddenly like, no, I actually like business. And I was like 18, 19 years old. And then fast forward, I'm like, no, I enjoy design. But when I realized that the people that I was working with, they are like 10 times better than me. And I'm like, am I really an artist? Bottom line, I think it's huge if we just spend some time showcasing that difference between the creative world and the startup world and now the teaching that you're talking about.
I love that you bring that up. I do really think about that, right? Because I can remember when I was a little kid thinking about, well, what do you want to be? And it's not like I wanted to be nobody wants to see themselves, I want to be a CEO. Like, what is that? That's a meaningless statement, right? Like, I don't know what a CEO is or what they do. Like, that's absurd. But I always wanted to be somebody who made things, an inventor or a creator. If I was writing an article, I wanted it to be the most cleanly written article I had ever written. If I was going to take a photo, I wanted it to be the most beautifully put together photo. I wanted it to be internally coherent. I wanted it to really speak something or say something. And to me, business is really an extension of that, especially when we talk about now ideas or concepts like lean startup, where you're really driven to, as opposed to that old model where it's sort of plug and play. Here are the pieces of a business and I just assemble them and fund them. We're really charged as young people now to be creative, to be innovative. And so that makes it super hard, right? Because there's less of a roadmap telling you, hey, today you need to wake up and focus on X, Y, Z. But on the other hand, it gives you so much breadth to be really, really creative with the way that you go about solving problems, even the way that you go about discovering what the problems of your customers are. So I really have learned that creativity and business are fast becoming one and the same, and that you need to constantly be nurturing your ability to think divergently, to think innovatively. And it's really, business is just sort of a language that we're using to describe a different kind of artistry, because all of us want to, at some root, provide value to people. Whether you're making plastic injection molding or you're producing photography for people to appreciate for their marketing, their social media, what we're doing at base is trying to tap into a need that somebody has, or tap into a desire or a problem, or fix an ill in somebody's life. And so that requires us to be really creative about how we solve those problems.
What about the teaching part? Do you see any conflicts between the traditional, and I say this, my mom, she taught for 30, 40 years. She's retired now, and she taught at college level and then on different levels. But bottom line, her mentality is completely different to what I now am being exposed in the past 8 years, I would say, in entrepreneurship. She now kind of like get it, and we can hold a conversation about entrepreneurship. But 6 years, the great thing, she always encouraged that. She never kind of like fought it or like got against that, but her mentality was different. Do you see that with your colleagues or folks in that arena?
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Because there is a really, really legitimate reason why a lot of education startups wind up becoming nonprofits. And it's because there is this assumption or this belief that those two ideas, the idea of maximizing and being profitable, will inevitably run into conflict with the vision of education, which is igniting creativity and intellect. And I do really feel that, in all honesty. We made the choice to form as a for-profit entity, And I'm constantly reminded that the most inefficient part of our business is the part that actually serves youth. But that's not the line item that you cut off to make your business more profitable, because in another very important way, our photographers that are working with us would not be interested in working with us if they couldn't share and pass their skills on to somebody who was eager to learn. We wouldn't be able to really demonstrate our support of, I guess there are just things that it just doesn't come down to dollars in some cases. It really just doesn't. And I'm happy as somebody who's running a business to keep those inefficiencies that support youth development and youth growth, because I know that the payoff over the course of the long term is much higher. So I see it as, in the same way that my parents would never have said to me, like, hey, we're not going to pay for your shoes because you're going to destroy them when you're a kid. Like, you have to do that with kids. Like, you have to invest in kids. Kids are wasteful. And I grew up in a household where my parents were constantly saying to me, like, hey, what do you want to try? Like, do you want to try something new? Like, we're willing to invest the money in letting you take karate classes. We're willing to, the greatest of greatest risks. Here's this beater car that we're going to let you drive around when you're 16 years old. You have to do that. Like, children are not a monetary investment per se in the same way that we think about a traditional business operation or business model. But there are all these externalities, all these additional benefits that we have just by having just the energy of children in our space, the creativity of kids. I was sitting a couple days ago editing some headshots, and one of our summer interns, Torres, he looks over at me and he was like, hey, Mr. Rob. I was like, what's up, Torres? He goes, why didn't you tell me editing is so cool? And it took me back, because you have to figure, for me, I've been doing this thing for over a decade. I see 200 images and I want to just bang out 200 images in 30 minutes and be done with it and let the check clear. And so I sometimes forget, what am I really doing in context? I'm providing value for somebody. I'm giving somebody headshots. And it's fun. It's fun to play around in this stuff. This is why we started doing all this stuff. So I guess there is that tension, that risk of conflict. I do think that it can't be circumvented, but it's there. It's an important piece of what we do. And we wouldn't want to have a business without those inefficiencies and without that learning.
Of course, the show Exponential Growth, we talk about personal and business growth. And you mentioned a couple of times how you guys changed the model because some of those were not scalable. Now we're talking about impact and the potential of bringing this youth a set of skills and something that they can carry over. Maybe turn it into a career, maybe not, but you're giving them the opportunity to discover and invest in them. You think that's scalable? Or could be that a way to doing what you're doing sustainably?
Absolutely. I think that there's a million and one ways to organize a business structure. When we found that scaling on that initial model where we were going to charge X number of dollars per hour wouldn't be functional from a logistic point of view, because once you're trying to manage 30 photographers and 30 kids, it's just too much. We say, okay, what can we do? What are the operators that we have? What are the advantages that we have? Well, we can now sell to destination management companies. And so instead of a couple $100s per hour, we can sell a product, or rather a service, for a few $1,000s a day, where we're activating a team of 4 to 8 photographers at a much higher margin, delivering a product that arguably takes less tech logistics, just more sort of human logistics, right? So there's nothing that says that we have to get all of our profit from one place, or that we can't be diversified in the services that we provide to people. And it's really just a function of how creative we can be. So we can scale it. We can go from a model where maybe it's not efficient to bring high school students on every single gig. Well, it's cheaper to allocate a portion of what you do to in-school trainings and partnering with the existing schools that have digital media or photography courses, and then providing the materials or reduced cost of materials and then access to a curriculum through there. So there's a million and one ways to do it. It's just a function of how you're going to be creative in the marketplace.
And the last M, so Greg covered the money, the business model, and the market, and we've briefly been talking about the mentorship piece of it, and that happens to include that you guys are some sort of providing mentorship to these young students. But let's wrap it up with the management side. So you talk about, and I think this is key, especially with growth, handling growth and managing people. The first one, you just talking about it, and it sounds very chaotic. It's just 30 photographers all over the places. So now you say this one is managing logistics, more people, not necessarily tech? And how is that working? And what are some of the tools that you guys use on managing teams, photographers?
Oh man, that's a great question. It's this model that we're now foraying into. The first opportunity that we will have to pitch it to a high-end destination management company is actually coming next Wednesday. So I don't know when you guys go to print or press, but we'll have to put it in the footnotes and see how that works. Really, it gets easier to manage teams because we can assign a production manager, a single individual that handles the throughput from a client to 5 individuals. So maybe 2 of those people are photographers, 2 of them are editors, 1 of them is a production assistant, and then 1 individual manages that chain between the client and that team of 5. That's significantly easier to facilitate when all of those people are in one place, in one conference, one building, and in pretty ready access communication-wise with each other. What we were trying to do initially was to do it all digitally. So it makes it easier from a sort of traditional management standpoint, but it becomes a logistical nightmare. Because when you want to say every gig that we have 4 days prior, we want to send an email to the client as a reminder, but you have 3 or 4 shoots happening concurrently, it becomes chaos. And then when you talk about photos coming in on the back end, there are gigabytes of files that have to be transferred. They have to go from somebody's internet connection, and who knows how good that is. It has to be uploaded to a Dropbox or a WeTransfer or a Google Drive. Now we have to take these gigabytes of files and edit them and then schlep them back to the client. So we really ran into tech problems that as a bootstrap startup without somebody who has a background in heavy duty coding, just it wasn't our direction to go. It wasn't something where we could solve that problem right away.
Yeah, and I can think of multiple tools from Slack to some project management tool, Asana or Rag, you name it. There's dozens of different tools. Have you guys tried any of those or tried to implement that? And we'll call it on the field when the photographers are at the event, all out there. But do you guys have identify any tool to communicate, or is just, I mean, text messages and email definitely it's not going to be the best way.
I really wish I really wish I could. I really wish I could give you the laundry list because we've seen them all, everything from the Google Calendar to the Asanas to the Trellos. And they work well for large-scale individual projects, but when you're running multiple concurrent projects that have the same kind of workflows, even something like a T-Sheets, which is a website that manages remote contractors or remote workers, it's the kind of thing where they would solve some problems for us, but it would create a lot of other problems just in utilizing the interface. One of the best choices that we ever made, and this might sound silly, one of the best choices that we ever made was we invested in a set of walkie-talkies.
Nice.
And walkie-talkies with earpieces. And aside from feeling like a CIA operative anywhere that you went, it was just the easiest way while everyone was in one room to just sort of quietly pick your shirt up and say, hey, did you get the shot of this person over here? And just doing it in person where you don't have people dispersed over a 30-mile radius makes it infinitely easier.
Wow. Wonderful.
So walkie-talkies.
So keep it classic, go back. It never fails. That's awesome. We're here at Launchpad, and Dalton introduced you to you. He had a lot of great things to say about you. That was episode number 9, and he's running Main Street. So he has some couple questions for you right now. We're just putting you on the spot, but I know he knows you. You've been here for what, 4 months, Dalton?
Yeah.
4 months, and you did mention that you guys met, and now you guys are handling kind of like, is it a social thing going on Mondays, like a happy hour or something like that?
Yeah, tell them about that, Rob.
It's a Monday night get together, a happy hour. So just a group of folks who are working in some capacity in the entrepreneurial sector, and it's as easy as getting together, going to La Casita on Julia Street, or going to Courtyard Brewery, which is one of the microbreweries, and just sitting down and facilitating really honest conversations. Because one of the things we really, as the sort of few, the proud entrepreneurs in New Orleans, have an opportunity to shape what that culture looks like. I think that all of us really are coming to the agreement that it's better to collaborate and just be real about the sort of struggles that we have, as opposed to just put on this stern face and suffer in silence. So we have real conversations. We sit down around some tasty microbrews over at Courtyard and just say, hey, what's driving you nuts this week? What's driving you totally bonkers up the wall? And just in that small roundtable environment, we're really able to facilitate some honest conversations where folks have come out of there with resources that they would have never had or connections that they would have never had. And that honestly has been a really, really good growth engine for all of us. And we're all doing different things. I mean, there are folks who are starting schools in the city, who are running design companies, who are working in environmental sciences. So any sort of stretch across New Orleans, we've been able to find folks in some sort of relationship or be able to put people together essentially and create valuable information.
Rob, I've got a quick question for you. So you mentioned earlier how you kind of realized that you had a product that you might not be able to scale, and so you kind of had to pivot. Kind of tell us about that conversation you have to have with yourself. You know, obviously everybody loves their baby and nobody wants to change it and they think it's perfect, right? But tell us about kind of the thoughts that you were having, that you actually came to the realization of, hey, this isn't going to work. It's okay for me to change course and go down a different path.
It's a good question. I might be the worst person to ask about this because I'm so far away from the die-hard, here is my solution, I'm trying to save the world with it, regardless of what the market says. It's really, all of us are subject to market forces, and nobody is going to buy something that isn't valuable to them or that they don't want. And if what you're selling doesn't make sense on the back end, that's a very fast way to generate a lot of interest and then go broke. So to me, I'm always trying to listen we're constantly talking to our customers. We're talking to different segments of the market. And I'm just trying to listen for the echoes. What are they saying back to us? Where's the need? Are we solving a legitimate need? Because really, we're not providing just photographs, right? We're not like Olin Mills where you sit down with your family, cheese, and get a little snap and a keepsake. Especially in the 21st century, we're providing something really different. We're providing marketing materials. We're providing Instagram feeds. We're providing essentially everything that you think of when you think about the face of a company. So to me, it's all about the process of exploration and not being wedded to one particular model, because as the company grows, our resources increase, actual capital or our human capital, the folks that we work with. It would be irresponsible to try to stick to a model if you were not optimizing the folks that you had on hand to what the market needed.
I think that's great advice. I think you need to write that down, etch it in stone, and pass it around to everybody that we come across. That's great advice. And the fact that so many people get romantic about their idea instead of listening to what the market's telling them and be able to pivot and kind of adapt.
I do think that's something that is hard for especially entrepreneurs that are first starting out, is this idea of the home run at your first at bat. And I don't know if it's just a function of ego or pride or whatever, but inevitably all of us did the exact same thing where the first thing that we tried, the first thing where we said, this is the thing that I'm going to do, where we invested all this heart and this effort into it, we always expect it to be a home run. We always expect it to be a home run. I'm going to be a millionaire off of my online course that I built to teach people this thing. And it's never right. And that's the case. And that's the first thing that I think you really learn when you get into business, is that whatever your idea is, it's wrong. Like, it's just wrong. And maybe 1 out of every million people come in and hit a home run on their first at bat. But the reality of really learning and becoming wise in business is getting as many at bats as possible, taking as many hits as possible. That's where you really start finding success. I mean, heck, the first thing I was going to try to do when I was done working in the nonprofit game, the reason I mentioned online courses is because I sat down and for the entire month of August in my dinky little apartment, I set up a studio and I filmed myself teaching people how to take photographs. Taught them about their cameras. I taught them about editing. I taught them about processes, about workflow. And I literally spent a month every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, putting in a couple hours a day and working on this thing that nobody bought, that absolutely zero people bought. And as much as I thought that it was going to be this huge overnight success, it's the first thing that you learn is that whatever your idea is, it's wrong. It's just not real. And it's not a function of you having bad ideas. It's just a function of you not knowing enough about the marketplace, not knowing enough about what really motivates people. What are people trying to buy? What do people want to buy? What are they willing to buy? So that's why I talk about it being a function of creativity, is because you have to constantly think of new ways to activate whatever it is that you're providing to people and to activate the people that you're providing it to.
Awesome, man. Before we jump into the last question of the show, I was just Googling it right now, but Sean West, I don't know if you heard about him. He's very big into the creative world and he has a couple podcasts, but he's also a big provider of online training and building courses. So if you guys are out there, just want to check out Lambo Goal, which is pretty funny name for the podcast, but they have a goal of buying a Lamborghini, which is silly. But dude, those guys, the guy happened to have also long hair. So when you were talking about online courses, I'm like, hey,
You're laughing. I came too late to the gate.
yeah. Before I jump into that question, online education, and I'm pretty sure you just kind of like thought about the training and recording because you saw other successful people doing that. And there's thousands of people. I personally know people that they own business where it's just online training and this whole info marketing where they're selling courses for $500, $1,000. They're doing pretty well. Of course, there's all the people fighting and saying, you don't have a real business. That's not value. But what is that research, especially if you were teaching and you understand the value of teaching, what would you have to say about that online training world?
Man, that's a loaded question. I think honestly, what I've learned is this, that I can show you a million videos of what a hot pan looks like, but you won't know not to touch it until you try to grab something off the stove.
You go, boom.
I really do believe that. I think that nothing replaces the observation and the feedback of a true expert in their field. I think that any money that you're going to spend, but don't get me wrong, I think that a lot of these courses are really excellent at establishing baselines, at introducing folks to the concepts, and doing it in really artful ways. I think when you get down to brass tacks and you're talking about achieving mastery in certain subjects, I don't really see on a broad level folks achieving a very high level of mastery without that expert hands-on observation and feedback. I really, really do believe in that. I think there's a lot of value to mentorship. There's a lot of value to quality teaching that I learned both in the classroom as somebody who came in thinking that just because they were bright in undergrad, that they would just have an into this education thing, and very quickly getting the memo from the very disinterested 30 students in front of me that I was not particularly good at this teaching thing. And it took a lot of time to learn that, and to learn that you can be good at it, and it's all about the relationships. It's all about the feedback. It's all about being an expert in your field and knowing how to touch people individually. And that's really I think that's what we're all sort of going for as educators generally, is providing a high quality, not just curriculum, but a high quality of personal touch, giving people what they need.
Love it, man. So let's close out with the question where we'll talk about growth. So in personal or business growth, is there something that you know that you can attribute either personal or business growth that you know, hey, by me doing this or that, I'm definitely achieving growth? Or
Absolutely. I would say honestly two things. One is to read just everything and anything, but also then to read classics. So we're talking about undergrad. I did my undergrad in psychology and philosophy, and just absolutely loved that old school continental philosophy, talking about like your Friedrich Nietzsche, and then going into like French existentialism.
Why?
Why did I love
what? You got to ask it like 5 times. I'm just
for your intellect, right?
Right, but that's part of the whole thing. You ask and ask.
Oh, absolutely, and it's so challenging. And then you start reading, you start going way back, you start going to the pre-Socratics, you start looking at Heraclitus, you start looking at early Stoics, the folks that interested Marcus Aurelius, who's one of the sort of paramount leaders of his day. And you start asking yourself, what was he putting into his head to get something out of the things that he did every single day? And that is so important. So if you're going to read, I'm not saying just read BuzzFeed all day. You know, there's nothing wrong with reading BuzzFeed articles. I know I'm guilty of a few listicles myself, but read long form. Really get invested in heavy concepts and challenging yourself. I just picked up the Ansel Adams's 3-part series, The Camera, the Negative, and the Print. And he's one of probably the premier American photographer who literally wrote the book on it, developed his own metering system. And I had never read his words. I'd seen his pictures, and you think you know something about somebody by seeing what they produced. But the reality is that there's thousands of words behind that he wants to share with you, that he wants to take you through his process. He's really eager to. So it's just a question of really being willing to sit down and listen, or in that case, sit down and really read, to really pour over it.
Wow, so that's one, and you say one more, yeah.
The second one, write down what you want to do. So be it weekly, here are the things I have to accomplish this week. Be it over the course of a quarter, or in the next 90 days, here's what I want to do. But write it down. Just anything short of tattooing it directly onto your forehead in reverse so you see it every morning. Put it on paper. Make it exist. Don't put it in a Google Doc that sits on your drive that says stuff that I'm going to get to eventually, because it's gonna sit there with all the other lost bytes in the universe. But really just write it down. Put it in front of you. Write it on a note card and just staple it to the side of your MacBook. Just put it in the background to your phone. Just constantly remind yourself what it is that you're trying to do. Because the biggest issue that you can run into, especially when you're early stage and you're having to try so many things, is drifting off of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. Because it's really our charge as young entrepreneurs is to find how we know what our principle is, what our vision is. And so many people get distracted because they get more set on the goal or that individual thing than they do achieving their vision that they're really trying to accomplish. So really just writing it down and making sure that it's there, that it's a reminder, that it's in your face.
Wow, dude, that's useful. A lot of value right there. What's the best way to find you and contact you?
Best way to find me would be rob@Gigsy, GIGSY.co. You can find me on Instagram at shopbyrw. You could go to our website at gigsy.co. Yeah, I'm super responsive. Reach out to me. I love chatting with folks. If you're interested in slanging around pre-Socratic Stoic philosophy, I'd love to. I'd love to have you come and get a beer at Courtyard.
We'll have Greg do that. Hey, you guys gonna have fun doing that. We're definitely gonna come by and stop at one of those happy hours that you guys are putting together and just spend some time here in New Orleans. We're based right now in Baton Rouge, but we will definitely want to be more involved and engaged. So, man, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Can I give one more?
Totally, bring it on.
I think that, nobody has an excuse to not read this because it's in the public domain. But there's a book called The Enchiridion, Enchiridion, by Heraclitus, who is that previously mentioned pre-Socratic philosopher. I think that if you sit down, it's a pretty short book. Probably take you, if you're just kind of casually glancing over it, maybe a week just in your on and off time. I think it's one of the best reads if you're trying to get a sense of separating what the goal is that you're trying to achieve from all of the distractions and the passions and the things that would sit around whatever it is that you're trying to achieve.
He's trying to read what I just wrote down. He's just trying to read what I wrote down on my notebook.
I can't read Venezuelan English right now.
How you spell the last name of the author?
Heraclitus.
All right, I'm just going to link on the show notes. We're just going to put the link to Amazon so you guys can find it out there. Just curious, there's this guy in Silicon Valley that it's Ryan Holiday, I believe. He's really into philosophy, and then he came up with this book, Trust Me, I'm Lying. And now, a couple months ago, he launched one that is, I think, about ego, but he goes really deep down into that whole philosophy line, but now with a contemporary type of lifestyle, applying it to the startup world.
I love it. I'll definitely have to check them out. I think you need to be a bit of a philosopher if you're gonna jump into this world.
Sweet. There you go. Well, man, once again, thank you very much, and we'll get to see you very soon.
Great. Thank you guys so much, and thanks to everybody for listening through all of us chatting.